Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is John Robinson. John is the CISO of Defense Systems Sector for a large aerospace and defense company. Welcome, John.
Thanks so much, Pete. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here as well, John. Can you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Sure. So currently, as Pete mentioned, currently a Chief Information Security Officer for a multi-billion-dollar sector within a large defense and technology company. About 23 years of experience in IT overall, about 18 of those 23 in cyber specifically. I've worked in various roles, everything from my time spent in the United States Army, kind of cutting my teeth on IT, transitioning into information assurance, having worked in both technical, strategic, policy-related roles. I've even spent roughly 5-6 years now in the private sector, mainly focused on being able to kind of round out my skill sets and understanding of different industry verticals as it pertains to how cybersecurity enables business. It's not always just about remaining secure. It's about making sure that the business is able to continue to flourish and to be prosperous. During my time over the span of my career, I've also had the opportunity to be a senior cybersecurity advisor for the Deputy Undersecretary for Cybersecurity and Communications at DHS. And at that time, it was NPPD, the National Program and Protections Directorate, but now it's better known as CISA. So, I've been around the block a few times. I've gone through pretty much everything that you can as it pertains to IT and cyber, and I'm very blessed and fortunate to be here with you today, Pete.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks for being here. And you've had quite the storied career thus far. And it seems you've gotten some pretty valuable insight on both the public sector side as well as the private sector side of the house. Have you found hiring to be more challenging in one of those sides versus the other? Or I guess, could you compare hiring in those two areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say the short answer is it's pretty uniform in terms of hiring on both sides. But in terms of being able to be a bit more streamlined and precise in who you're looking to hire, I found it to be a bit easier on the private sector side because there's typically a little bit less bureaucracy and red tape when it comes to hiring. But at the same time, depending on the size of the company, that can also play a big factor into the decision-making process for who is considered to be a suitable candidate versus a situation where you may be looking to specifically hire early career talent meant to groom them. So depending on the mission associated, I found that oftentimes if it's a mission critical role or a mission critical organization like critical infrastructure, for instance, oftentimes there isn't always going to be as much of a ramp up period in terms of being able to really get the right talent in a very short period of time.
Yeah, and that definitely maps to my experience as well. There's often a sentiment I've found in the private sector where we need somebody to hit the ground running, and talking about industries such as critical infrastructure, obviously there's a lot of validity and necessary gates, I guess, as far as like gatekeeping to, you need very, very strong people in those roles, else you open yourself up to more potential attacks. But I think in general, the industry is in a big way in need of some more entry level roles as well. And so I kind of see the talent gap as we talk about it more so at that mid to senior individual contributor level. Granted, my experience has been primarily private sector, but would you say the security talent gap is real? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
That's the $1 million question, and I kind of struggle with that because there are colleagues of mine that feel that the talent gap is definitely real. It's a big thing. But in my personal experience, I've had no issues finding qualified talent for the roles that need to be filled. And this is for entry level as well as that kind of mid-level senior level role that you had mentioned as well. And I think that it's largely because of the fact that as I'm looking for talent, I'm not just looking for acronyms. I'm not just looking for degrees. I'm not just looking for how you have done academically. I'm looking for, do you have the intangibles that make for a great cybersecurity professional, right? And I think that a lot of times, just because a person may not have a specific cybersecurity role in terms of their title, but they may have been working in IT for many years, they oftentimes get overlooked because people think that you're just kind of typecast into one particular type of role that you can work in. But I found that people with IT backgrounds, especially, whether it be, it could be a handful of years doing systems administration, help desk, you name it, right? Those are oftentimes some of the people that I can get trained much faster because they already come to the table with baseline fundamental understandings of how IT works. But there's this really big press on folks that are looking to transition from non-IT specific careers into cyber. Totally fine. I would still be looking for many of the same intangibles that those folks would be providing, just through a different lens in terms of how they have previously done their jobs in other industry verticals. So I say all this because we have to kind of get away from the fact that just because a person has not started off their entire career in IT, that they're not qualified. That's not true. I feel as though a person who has the genuine interest, inquisitive nature, has a hunger and a desire to learn and to really be challenged, those are some of the best untapped, that is some of the best untapped potential that I found throughout my career.
Yeah, completely agree. And it seems to me, because I do all these career guidance calls with folks, that there are thousands, if not tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000 people trying to break into the industry right now, many of which do have home labs and do have good communication skills and do have critical thinking ability. And what I've found is we just have a lack of jobs in which for those folks to land. And generally, I hear the same refrain from the hiring managers. It's, well, in our particular case, we can't afford to hire at the entry level because we need somebody to hit the ground running. We don't have the spot for somebody entry level. We don't have the manpower to train this person because it does take a lot of hand holding in the beginning. And so I guess what I've been really trying to do with this podcast is, I guess, talk to hiring managers, to executives like yourself, and figure out what is that business case for building this training program that we know is going to take a certain amount of time to get off the ground. It's going to take a certain amount of investment. And on the other end of it, of course, we're going to have this pipeline of people that have all these intangibles. Mm-hmm. It's going to take some time up front. How have you been able to do that?
Yeah. So what I've been able to do is I started with promoting internally first, right? I started promoting folks who may be at a lower level in terms of their career, and giving them an opportunity to perform at the next level, which would free up the opportunity for me to be able to bring in someone that's a bit newer so that I can give them the ramp up. To me, I feel as though, and this is just based off of my personal experience. Of course, this is not based off of a general consensus of everyone else. But I have personally found over the course of my career that many times people in cybersecurity sit in their roles for far too long. And so what happens is you end up becoming a subject matter expert at, let's just say, for instance, we have different technical levels from, T1 all the way up through like T5, T6, right? And a person who may be a T2 has been a T2 for far too long because they're comfortable. They have to be willing to embark upon the next challenge in order to make sure that they keep their skills sharp, keep them fresh, and also put themselves in a position to where they can be not only a better use to themselves, but also a better use to the company. So what I've done is I've recently done a reorganization of my team to make sure that we first understand, do we have the right skills at the levels that are required in order for us to maintain continuity of operations at a minimum? I want to make sure that I'm limiting disruption to what we do in order to protect the company, to protect the business, to protect the data and everything else in terms of the infrastructure that we provide oversight for. But at the same time, I challenge each member of my team to think outside of the box. If you are no longer with this company, have you obtained all the skills that you feel are necessary for you to be able to continue to flourish? So it's kind of a two-way street where we're having open and honest and transparent conversations, but I'm also letting them know that my expectations are that they will step out of their comfort zone in order to help themselves as well as help the company. With that reorganization, I've been able to promote people from within, which then freed up opportunities for people at the T2 and T3 level for me to be able to bring them in. Because I don't need a team of folks that are all at the same level, but they're considered subject matter experts. Are you really considered a subject matter expert if you've never really stretched yourself? If you've never really challenged yourself or been exposed to things outside of your norm? So within the past year specifically, I've been able to bring in someone. I converted them from a Pathways employee to a permanent employee. He has 3 years of experience, as an example. I also brought in from another organization a highly talented young lady who hit the ground running because of the fact that I looked at those intangibles. Did she already have the baseline understanding of IT that I expect at a T3? Absolutely. Did she specifically hit every single checkbox in terms of what we do within our organization? No. But she hit the ground running, and she's been recognized multiple times within the last 9 months, just based off of the fact that she took what she already knew and she was able to take ownership of the division that she supports. So I have 3 divisions within my sector, as an example. Within each of my divisions, I have dedicated security engineers that provide specific support to each of those business lines. And there's a level of understanding that has to be brought to the table from the very beginning, but then there's also stuff that we can fine tune. Then I have a highly skilled technical lead who is familiar with everything, right? So we're taking a layered approach, just like how they say you should, as it pertains to cyber, you have layered defenses. We should be taking a layered approach as it pertains to our hiring. You don't want everybody to be on the same page in terms of understanding, in terms of background, in terms of what they've done over the course of their career, because then you have everybody thinking in the same box and no one's thinking outside of the box in order to bring new ways forward. So those are just some of the high level ways in which I've been able to yield a tremendous amount of results immediately, that the business has recognized, that my CIO has recognized, that other executives within the company have recognized, because of the fact that we have been thinking outside of the box and not just looking for, do you already come to the table with 18 years of experience, a CISSP, a MBA, and everything else, and you're only looking for a T2 level job. That's unfair and unreasonable.
Yeah, it seems like you've created a lot of movement within your organization, both vertically and it sounds like horizontally as well, asking people to stretch into skill sets that are there's more breadth, basically.
Yes.
Each person is learning continuously. And yeah, that's what you mentioned, kind of basically doing constant succession planning, where you're constantly moving up everybody in the organization, and ultimately that leaves a space at the bottom. That's definitely a best practice that's come up in previous conversations I've had on the podcast. Often I'll hear, though, from people on more so the ground level that are working in a SOC or are a security engineer, sometimes they'll feel like they're getting stuck, where they do want to move and they do want to learn more. And they're basically waiting for somebody to move up or die. And in some organizations, it's very static and there isn't that movement. How do you prevent, I guess, your organization from ossifying like that and preventing people from moving around and up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have one-on-ones with each member of my team. It's all based off of their desire, right? So we have team syncs, but we also have one-on-ones. And I hate to use this term, but I have an open door policy, right? So whenever you put time on my calendar, that's your time, right? You have 30 minutes. We talk about what you want to talk about. There are folks on my team where we may talk about his farm and the animals that he raises. There are other folks on my team that are talking about career progression. There are folks that are talking about, just wanting a bit more understanding of my role as a CISO, right? But at the same time, after we have built that personal one-on-one rapport, it really comes down to the fact that if you're unhappy, I need to know. It can't just be this situation where I'm holding people hostage because of the fact that I want to feel as though I have control. This is not about control. That's one of the first things that I make sure to communicate to my team. This is not about control, because I am here to enable you. If I am not putting myself in a position to ensure that you are getting what you need out of this, I have failed you. I have failed you as a leader. I have failed you as a mentor. I have failed you across the board. And so that's one of the things that I continue to impress upon my team, is the importance of us having open dialogue, communication, relying on each other and trusting each other. If you're interested in a different role, apply for it, right? So one of my colleagues, he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I'm hiring for this role. Do you, if you could share it, that'd be great," because he's looking to fill it. So yes, we have a fantastic team. We're knocking things out of the park, but I still shared it because it's not always about what people say. It's about what they don't say. And so if there's an opportunity for me to be able to fulfill a desire that a member of my team has that they may not have expressed, then I'm also failing them there too. I try my best to think outside of the box in terms of the experiences that I've also had. I've had great managers. I've had horrible managers. And I try to take the very best lessons from both sides of the coin. And I also challenge and request my team members to hold me accountable, because oftentimes it's hard to see yourself. And so you have to ask folks on the other side, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Are there opportunities for me to help you grow? Are you getting everything that you need out of this? Because this comes down to reciprocity. I feel as though at every single point in your career, it should always be mutually beneficial for both the employee and the company. If it's one-sided, it's never going to work out. So those are just some of the ways that I found success. And then at the end of the day, I'm also extremely fortunate. I have a team of highly intelligent, very bright folks that come to work every day with the passion, the commitment to the mission. Because of course, with with the defense sector being our largest customer, it's bigger than us, right? We are providing solutions for the warfighter. And so we want to make sure that they're getting what they need and that they get home safe.
Great. What? How would you say your leadership philosophy has evolved, and like how did you come to this this way of managing and leading people? Because it seems very hands-on for somebody who's as high up in the organization as you are. How did that come about?
Yeah, so it started when I was in the Army. The military is largely based off of hierarchy, leadership, all of those things. And you have to understand how people think, what people need, and also understanding that there is no blanket approach, right? Everyone is unique. They have their own interests. Like I had mentioned earlier, one of the guys on my team, he loves bowling. He's like an excellent bowler. Another guy, he has a farm in Wisconsin, right? I have another guy who is passionate about coaching his kids, right? They play sports. I have another guy who is through and through. He loves technology, right? Find what you're passionate about. Another young lady on my team, she loves work, but at the same time, she loves her family, right? And so I had to learn the importance of communication first, right? Everyone communicates differently. Everyone has their own passions, their own desires. I also understand that not everybody who is in cyber loves cyber. Some people do it because that's what pays their bills, right? So I can't have unreasonable expectations for folks without understanding. Well, I shouldn't have unreasonable expectations at all. But my expectations have to be tempered based off of what motivates people in order for them to achieve what they have personally set as a goal, and not just about what my goals are or what the company's goals are.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned some folks may be in security, but they don't necessarily, that's not really their main interest. It may be their family. I think oftentimes, and I'll hear this on LinkedIn, there's a sense that security has to be all you think about. It has to be everything you're doing in your free time. You really need to have quote unquote passion for security to be a security practitioner.
Right.
I tend to believe that everybody has their own motivators, and I think there's a place with security experience or there's a place for anybody with security experience within the security field. I don't think you necessarily have to live and breathe it in your off time. Yes, could you make a case to that person who believes you need to live and breathe security in every second of your waking life? Like, I guess for you, right, as a case study, maybe if you had an employee that performed very well at work, but didn't necessarily want to take it home with them.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm a classic example. So I've been doing this for a very long time, right? I've been in this game over 20 years, but do I eat, sleep, and breathe cyber and IT and technology? No. One, my kids won't allow me to do that because they need their time. Am I forcing technology down my kids' throats? No, because at the end of the day, I still want them to find what they're passionate about. My passions don't have to become their passions. Thirdly, many people don't realize, but at one point I was a professional landscaper. So I would do cybersecurity as my main job, and I would run a professional landscaping business in my off time, right? I love landscaping, right? I've had a ton of success in my career on the cyber side, but at the same time, I love real estate, right? I love travel. Whenever I'm traveling, you're not going to catch me reading cybersecurity books. It's just not going to happen. Now, do I read books? All the time. I'm actually reading a book right now about the Tuskegee Airmen and some stories that are specifically related to that time, written by pilots during that time. And my wife and I, we were on a flight to Naples, Florida. I didn't take one cybersecurity book with me. I was reading and just relaxing, because sometimes you have to decompress. You can't just immerse yourself in something and then 30 years down the line still have the same amount of love for it, right? Sometimes you need breaks. You got to walk away, come back to it. It's just like if you're looking at spreadsheets all day. If I look at spreadsheets for 8 hours, I'm bound to miss something, as opposed to look at it for a couple hours, take a step away, come back to it with fresh eyes, right? Renewed energy and vigor. Then you're less likely to make mistakes. And so I encourage my team, find what you're passionate about. If you're passionate about cyber and you want to do it 24 hours a day, that's fine, right? But find what drives you and let that be the motivator for why you bring yourself to work every day, as opposed to feeling like you're being forced into a mold that just doesn't fit your personality and your desires.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I think just in general, we need to have more open-minded hiring, especially at the entry level. Often I'll hear that a common interview question is, in addition to the basic questions about networking and stuff like that, hiring managers will often try to suss out somebody's passion for the field. And that's really the thing that they care most about. It's like, what are you reading? What's the latest news on security that you've heard? What's the latest exploit that's keeping you up at night? That sort of thing.
Right.
But there's a sense that if you don't have a good answer to that, you're not a fit for the field. So that's
right.
why I ask these types of questions. I guess, could you think of any challenges that you've encountered over the years in hiring? I mean, it sounds like, you've been very successful in building a cohesive team and hiring, but I'd imagine there's some recurring things that have popped up over the years.
Yes. It hasn't been all smooth sailing. Challenges that I've experienced in hiring is timing, one. Just because we are hiring for a position doesn't necessarily mean that the candidate that we think is ideal is available or even interested. Availability of funding. So here it is, in the role that I'm currently in, I've been able to hire and increase my team size by 33%. But that's largely after I've waited 2.5 years for the funding to be able to do it, right? Because unfortunately in cyber, we're considered to be a cost center as opposed to, a revenue generator, right? Now, of course, if you're selling security services or products, things like that, that may be a little bit different. But in this particular instance, especially when you're dealing with large corporations, cybersecurity is typically considered a cost center. So the amount of justification for hiring that is not predicated on a recently experienced incident can oftentimes be an uphill battle, because you're now having to convince and gain buy-in from other executives who may control all of the purse strings as it pertains to budgetary distribution. So, it's really about understanding what I need to be able to do in order to justify my need, as well as what can we truly get done in order to be able to quantify what can't get done. So one of the challenges earlier in my career, when I first started asking about, I need additional resources, and it was largely based off of, well, we're just extremely busy, so it just seems as though we would be able to bring in another body and make things easier. That doesn't work in business. In business, it's about quantification. It's about understanding to what extent you have people that are currently being used and whether or not they have, well, not used, but their time allocation. That's a better term for me to speak to use. But in terms of, if someone is already being over leveraged, are they truly doing what the job calls for? Do you have a clear statement of work outlined? Based off of the amount of time in that statement of work, how much of that statement of work is actually mission critical versus a nice to have? These are all challenges that you may face, because we're not talking about requesting additional resources from other cyber folks. We're talking about requesting funding from a CIO, a CFO, a COO, people that are directly involved in managing the distribution of funding. So it goes back to an earlier point that you made, Pete, about communication. If all you're communicating is technical speak, but you're not able to speak to folks based off of how they interpret the information, right? Like, a lot of times people say that you don't always have to be the most technical to be a CISO. Absolutely correct. Largely because you have to understand how to communicate in other ways. You have to understand how CFOs think, how they communicate, how other executives. My CIO, we don't talk about the latest variant of malware. We don't talk about the most recent incidents on a regular basis. Every once in a while, he'll want to dig in, and we'll talk about the meaty specifics of a particular high-profile incident. But we talk more about business enablement. And then there are times whenever there is a cyber-specific need, we will sit down and have a cyber-specific conversation. But it's not his role to become a cyber expert. I need to equip him with the tools that are enough for him to be able to navigate and understand what may come his way. But at the same time, if I don't do that, that's an even bigger challenge, right? So there's a series of challenges that I've experienced in terms of timing, in terms of candidate availability, in terms of working with time constraints. Hiring processes oftentimes are broken. They take too long. So I could have a rock star candidate, and all because the company's hiring processes take 3 months, I lost him or her, right? Those are, I would say, the predominant types of issues that I would experience over the course of my career with regard to hiring. But I think that it largely just comes down to having efficient processes in place. This is not a technology solution. I think that a lot of times folks are they're motivated by different things, right? Even on the hiring side. In HR, a person that works in HR, they may be up to their eyeballs in candidates and offer letters. And I'm just adding one more to the pile. And that could be the one candidate that just said, okay, this is taking too long, I'm out, right? We have to think about how this functions at a basic, fundamental human level. And I think once we start to really understand that, then people will have a bit more empathy and extend a bit more grace.
Agreed. Yeah, I think anybody could really do with some process training, go to an ITIL course or something like that.
Yes.
Help people understand where the bottlenecks in whatever process they're managing are, because it's so crucial. If you're able to identify that the candidates are getting caught on one person's desk because they have too many things to get through, then if you can eliminate that bottleneck, things flow much more smoothly. And I totally agree. It's a people and process issue in hiring these days. It's not a technology issue. There's a lot of people that talk about applicant tracking systems and how they auto-reject people, which doesn't happen. Or they'll blame the technology when in reality, it's people being overworked and disorganized. And that's contributing to people getting ghosted and things like that. You mentioned a great point about the hiring process, making sure that that's streamlined. have you been able to affect any change as far as truncating the hiring process at all to make it more possible to get people on board?
Ooh. Smaller organizations, yes. Larger organizations, that's a bit of an uphill battle because you have an entire machine behind that, as opposed to that kind of custom and bespoke one-on-one interaction. I just try to work with my HR business partner as much as possible, remain open and honest and transparent. Also, my folks in business management, right? So, as a matter of fact, I just had a budget variance review meeting yesterday, and I am constantly letting them know this is what I'm thinking about doing. So it doesn't hit them as a surprise or I'm coming at them cold, because when a person, especially the folks that hold the money, when they are warmed and prepped, they are much more willing to listen to what you have to say, as opposed to sticker shock whenever they say, "Oh, well, that'll have an impact on the budget," right? So it's I've had to be an excellent communicator in order to make sure that I can gain buy-in. And once that buy-in, and it takes time, because like I said, it took 2.5 years to really make it to a point to where if I'm requesting something, somebody understands that I really need it, as opposed to it just being a nice to have.
Yeah, and it sounds like you were kind of planting seeds throughout the process that eventually you would harvest. You put that bug in somebody's ear early on, a couple of years in the past, and then eventually, what you keep building on that, you'll get to where you need to go. And I think that's a problem a lot of executives and hiring managers these days are struggling with. It's the idea that, hey, we got to really tighten the purse strings. This has been a crazy year. We don't know what the economy is going to do. We really can't afford to budget for any new headcount this year or anything like that. And obviously, it took you a couple of years to get some budget and some headcount. What were you able to do, I guess, in the meantime when you didn't have that approval and you had to do more with less? Are there any best practices you kind of picked up over the years?
Yeah. So one of the first things I did, and let me preface it with this. So the role that I'm currently in, I started in the heart of COVID. So, I mean, my first day when I got my badge, by the time I got back to my desk, I had received an email because I was contact traced, and there was only 3 people in the office. It was the badge administrator, another employee, and me. And somebody had thought that they had contracted COVID, right? So you can imagine it was a very tense and heightened environment. There was no travel. Everybody had tightened up on the purse strings during COVID. And I first had to understand, okay, let's evaluate our statement of work, right? And I evaluated the statement of work to understand, okay, what have we been doing historically before I came on board? What are some of the things that my team finds absolutely zero value in, so that I can then take that list and go to the business and say, hey, are these things on this list still needed? Historically, has the way that we've been doing our job, has that been providing any tangible benefit for you? And anything that was overwhelmingly no, we got rid of. Right? Because I'm not the type of leader that wants to look busy. I always stress the importance of us doing impactful work. Yes, there is going to be sometimes there's going to be things that we actually don't like to do, but it's necessary. And then there's some things that you're doing and you're sitting there saying to yourself, why are we doing this? And no one can answer the question. When everybody's looking at each other and they say, well, I don't know, or we've always done it this way. Time to reevaluate. Let's cut where we can. Because I didn't want it to be a situation where we're already highly stressed. We are scared to death about the current epidemic that we're experiencing during that time. And I needed to make sure that we kept our eye on the ball. And so during that time was just a matter of doing some housekeeping, right? To really identify and get to know the pain points, the areas that we do, or the things that we do very well. And then from there, that was when I set out on a tear to just get as many meetings as I could. Of course, it was virtual at the time. Get as many meetings as I could with executives across the different functional areas, because I want to understand the business. Are we just doing cyber for the sake of saying that we do cyber, or are we able to demonstrate that we are bringing cyber to the table as an enabler? And anytime that we are considered to be an enabler, that's whenever I know that we are doing our job the right way.
And that's a common thing that I'm hearing these days. When the purse strings are being tightened, you almost have to link security to enabling business or contributing to revenue in some way. How are you able to form that link to help people understand that security is here as a positive to everybody?
Yeah, another great question, Pete. So one of the first things that I had to do was I had to have some hard conversations. And in the beginning, our organization was perceived as the team of no, right? It was, oh, we don't want to bring in cyber because they're going to say no. We got to move quickly. We can't have all these bottlenecks. Unfortunately, 85% of the time, it always ends up coming back to us because there are cybersecurity requirements. And so we end up finding out too late. So I had to get ahead of that. And I had to have conversations with leaders, and I asked them, how do you envision cybersecurity helping you to enable your business? Right? And then we made some modifications to the way in which we approached cyber. We have a rule. The answer can't be no. And that's not a bad thing. It's not that we just let everything slide. It's that it really challenges everyone to come together and find an amenable solution for everybody. So if it's a situation where we can't do something, it's likely because we don't have a technological solution to automate it. But there's always a way that we can make something happen, even if it's temporary, until we get to that automated solution. Also, within my sector, we are growing exponentially in terms of our global presence. So I had to shift the focus of my team, and I told them, I said, yes, you guys, your primary focus is on cyber, but your secondary focus has to be on enabling the business. If I ask you what your division specializes in and what are the priority programs within your division and you don't know them, that's a problem, because I have to know them, right? How can you truly demonstrate that you are doing your job effectively if you don't know what you need to secure within your organization? Also, thinking outside of the box. If the business is coming to us with an idea, we can't say no. Because if we say no, then they're going to say, I'm not going to come to them with an idea again, right? we have to welcome the communication in order for us to be able to establish and maintain a relationship. So each one of the folks on my team, as I had mentioned before, especially the ones that are directly assigned to a particular division, they have to more deeply embed themselves within the business. So it shouldn't just always be me being the face of cyber. It should be, regardless of who you talk to, whether it's me or a member of my team, you should feel confident that you're getting the support that you need and you're getting the expertise. And so it was really, and it goes back to my earlier point about stretching. We don't just have one primary role on this team. We have two, sometimes three, right? We're cybersecurity experts. Yes. We're consultants. Yes. We're great listeners. Yes. And we come to the table with outside of the box thinking in a strategic fashion. So that is what I have found during those kind of tumultuous times during COVID that helped us to be able to be invited to the table much more frequently, as opposed to having to fight for a seat at the table.
That's great. And I love how your team are essentially a bunch of evangelists for your department too. That seems like a great way to go about it. What about, obviously you're very articulate in the way that you describe leading your team, and I'm sure a lot of folks appreciate that you've thought so much about it. What have you implemented, I guess, from like a retention and culture standpoint in building your team? What are some, I guess, best practices that you could think of there?
Yeah, so diversity is number one. I want diverse thinking across the board. I want different backgrounds. I don't want folks that are just marching to the beat of the same drum. I prefer to shake things up. When I did my most recent hire, I told my deputy, I said, "Hey, I want someone that has foundational knowledge of cyber, but I'm looking for someone with a business degree," right? Because of the fact that there's nobody else on my team who had a business degree. They were all, IT or cyber, something along those lines. I wanted to shake things up. Also, training. So fortunately, we have a ton of training resources, but everybody learns differently. So I had to understand, okay, are you a read a book type of learner and you feel like you're trained? Do you need to go to a boot camp? Do you need to have on-the-job training, right? I need to understand the composition of my team in order to make sure that I am meeting their needs. Also, with regard to our employee satisfaction ratings, I'm sitting down and I'm talking with my team to make sure that they understand that, hey, I'm listening. I hear what you're saying. And these are some of the recommendations that I think I can bring to the table in order to help get you where you want to be. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, having those one-on-one conversations, right? Listening. I'm listening more than I'm talking. In terms of retention, also, I encourage people to explore things within the company, right? Explore. And that's important because the grass isn't always as green on the other side as we may think it is. And so if you have the opportunity to explore in an environment that has no pressure associated with it, then you're much more open to your situation. You could be mad today that you were given an assignment that you didn't like. But when you think about it, how often does that happen, right? Also, I encourage the team to work collectively among each other so that they don't feel as though they can't be themselves because I'm around, right? So not only do we meet collectively as a team, but the team themselves meet much more frequently in order to maintain that camaraderie and have a safe space to communicate. And then recognition. I am constantly recognizing, and I encourage other leaders to recognize what's happening within my organization, right? So I'm a sector CISO. So there are times when I think that this year alone, there's been at least 8 to 10 times where members of my team have been recognized by different functions, different business lines, all of that stuff. And I send it all the way up to the top. I want to make sure that you're getting recognized from the corporate CISO, from the CIO, from the sector CIO, from everybody, to demonstrate that what you're doing is appreciated. When I was coming up in cyber, we didn't look for recognition because it never came. Right? It was just one of those things where we kept our heads down. We did a good job. We would be recognized within our little group, and that was about it. But I scream from the mountaintops, and I make sure that folks understand that this team is doing amazing things, and we are changing the face of cyber within this organization. And then last but not least, from a retention perspective, as well as just keeping morale high, I try to encourage folks, take time off. Cyber's not going anywhere. Take time off. If you need me, I can roll up my sleeves, I can get in there, and I can get dirty. We watch each other's backs, and I think that this is a lot of what I've learned during my time in the Army, because we had what are called battle buddies. You don't go anywhere without your battle buddy. Don't screw your battle buddy over. Look out for your battle buddy. Make sure that you're communicating. You watch out for them. So each one of us, we have that ingrained in our heads to make sure that we are putting ourselves in a position to where we're looking out for each other. And those are just some of the fundamentals. It's more EQ than IQ, right? And I owe a lot of that to my wife, right? My wife, she's a feeler, high EQ, and I'm just constantly open to learning as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's interesting. Of all those things that you mentioned surrounding retention, money wasn't one of them, I noticed. So I think that's a trap a lot of folks fall into, is they kind of default to thinking that money is the way to keep people sticking around. And I like you said before, everybody has their own motivators. Everybody has their own thing that gets them out of bed in the morning. And if you know what those things are, you don't have to necessarily pay top of the industry. Sure, it helps. And golden handcuffs are a real thing, but do you really want to keep people around that don't want to be there and they're only there because of the money? I would argue probably not.
Yeah. I've learned that money gets the person in the door, but it doesn't keep them. Now, don't get me wrong. I make sure that my team is compensated well, but at the same time, I've yet to have a conversation where someone felt as though they're not getting paid fairly, or that they're not being taken care of. Because ultimately, it's the experience that a person has with the people that they work with that I have found over time that keeps them in an organization, not how much they're getting paid. Because there's always going to be somebody who's willing to pay more, but not everyone has an environment or a culture where people feel included, where they feel that like they're valued, and all of those things.
Absolutely. Just a simple attaboy can go a long way, I think, for
That's
sure.
Right.
Because so people are, I think, today so not used to getting that. It seems like the relationship between employees and employers becomes more and more transactional by the year. So just that investment from leaders can make all the difference in hanging on to people. But yeah, we're coming up on time here, John. So just one last question for you. Is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Let's see. I would say this. The hiring landscape has changed dramatically, mainly because of the fact that you have a lot more people who are getting into the industry. Whereas before it was kind of highly coveted, not very many people. It was kind of starting off. This was around the time when it was information assurance, right? And then cybersecurity became the new buzzword and started to kind of take the world by storm. But speaking from personal experience in terms of where I think that we can take this, in terms of hiring the right talent, in terms of creating an environment and fostering the type of environment where people truly flourish, not just getting into the industry, is that we have to look beyond the surface. It can't just be the person who has the most accolades and the acronyms behind their name. Because like I had mentioned earlier, not everyone in cyber has a passion for cyber. They're looking for something to change their life, and they may not necessarily figured out whether cyber is it. But at the same time, they have that drive, that desire that is going to have them come in and they're going to outshine most, because you don't know behind the scenes what's motivating them. There are folks that come from different backgrounds that may not be as fortunate, may not have graduated from a top tier school, may not have had the opportunity to get these high end, very expensive certifications, but it doesn't mean that they're not intelligent, right? We have to truly think about, if we were in a situation where there has been such a shift in the industry as it pertains to cyber, are we shifting with it, or are we expecting the industry to shift back? And we already know the answer to that. It's not going to shift back. We have to continue to ebb and flow with the industry. And I would say, lastly, take a deep look at the folks that are currently in role that have been waiting for an opportunity to progress. Those are the folks that will be committed. Those are the folks that will be with you long term. And those are the ones that already have the institutional knowledge that you don't want walking out of the door, that will stay resident to where you currently are, and helps to clear the way for those folks that are just looking for a way into the industry. So that's just kind of some of the thoughts that come to mind immediately.
Absolutely. And a great place to end too. Kind of come in full circle. If we move people up within our organizations, we leave more room at the bottom. So that's a great point, John, and certainly appreciate your time. If people want to find you, what's the best way to do so?
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. That's the only platform that I'm on. But yeah, you can't miss me. Just put in John Robinson Cyber. You'll see my picture, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that people have. Definitely open to connecting. And as I always say, my network is your network. So if there's a way that I can extend an opportunity, whether it be on my team or other teams that I know some of my colleagues are hiring for, I'm always happy to push for the information. But one caveat: just because you send me a resume doesn't necessarily mean that it's ready. Okay, so if it's not ready, I will always give you some advice on how to polish it up a bit, because I want you to be able to put your best foot forward.
Absolutely. And to anybody listening, I'm happy to help you with your resume before it makes it to John. So
awesome.
Thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.